The UN Security Council is due to vote tomorrow on a draft resolution on the disputed status of Jerusalem. The body will consider a text submitted by Egypt after US President Donald Trump said that Washington would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, that decision has triggered a new surge of violence in the Gaza Strip and West Bank and protests across the Muslim world.
In the Gaza Strip, effigies of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu burn. Earlier, protesters carried models of the Temple Mount through the streets. These symbolic acts bear one message: Jerusalem belongs to the Palestinians and can never become Israel's capital. Almost 100 kilometers away, more protests.
We are here tonight in the Nativity Square, Muslims and the Christians, on this candles stop to send different messages to all the world. First of all, we are refusing the speech of Trump, who announced Jerusalem as a capital for what called Israel, and moving the embassy, the American embassy, to Jerusalem.
Crowds demonstrated in Turkey too. The country's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, making a diplomatic statement in support of the Palestinians.
Since Jerusalem is currently under occupation, we cannot go there and open our embassy. But our consulate general is represented at ambassador level, so we have de facto accomplished this. But God willing, the day is close when officially we will open our embassy there.
Despite the protests, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated his support for Trump's plan to move the US embassy to Jerusalem, and he condemned Egypt's introduction of a draft UN resolution seeking to reverse the move.
I would like to express once again my special appreciation for the determination and leadership of President Trump and his administration in defending the truth of Israel. They reject attempts to use the UN as a platform against Israel.
Just days before US Vice President Mike Pence is due to visit Israel, divisions in the Middle East seem deeper than ever.
And for more on this story, I'm joined in studio by correspondent Maya Shweda, who's actually just returned from Jerusalem, where you were covering this exact story. So what exactly is in this resolution that Egypt is going to present to the UN?
So it's a very short resolution. It's just one page, and basically it just calls for the UN to reject what Donald Trump has says. It's calling for them to affirm that this change in Jerusalem's status has no legal effect, that it must be reversed, and that the status of Jerusalem has to be resolved through these peace negotiations, which have actually been stalled since 2014. And there currently, as far as we know, are no public peace negotiations happening. And it's also calling on all countries to not move their embassies to Jerusalem. As we know, all countries that have business with Israel and recognize Israel keep their embassies in Tel Aviv right now. But it's worth taking a step back and remembering why Jerusalem is such a big deal. This is a city that's very old. It has a lot of religious, historical, cultural context for people around the world, and especially for people who are in this region. And it was supposed to be the last thing, the last piece of these peace negotiations to be negotiated. And it was supposed to be, theoretically split between the Israelis and the Palestinians as a partial capital for both. And this move by Trump has upended any sort of progress that has been made in the past, really 7 decades of the U.S. being a partner in these negotiations.
So what happens if the UN does vote in favor of this resolution?
So we have to be honest with ourselves here. The U.S. has a veto vote on the UN Security Council. The U.S. is one of 5 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. So in all likelihood, the U.S. is going to veto this resolution when it's put on the table to vote tomorrow. But what is then going to happen after that, likely, is the Palestinians will then turn to the General Assembly. And the UN as a body has a record of voting in a very pro-Palestinian fashion, if not very anti-Israel fashion. The UNGA and the UN Security Council pass more resolutions against Israel than any other country. And we can look back as late as 2012, when Palestine went before the UNGA to be recognized as a non-member observer state and won that vote after losing it in the Security Council because the U.S. vetoed it. Right. So likely that they're going to turn to the UNGA, and we'll see some sort of resolution about recognizing East Jerusalem, if not all of Jerusalem, as the capital of Palestine.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is set to visit Israel this Wednesday. Very interesting time for him to be there. What kind of reception do you think he'll get?
It's worth remembering that this trip was actually planned before all of this happened, but now, of course, it has a much different context and a much different tenor to the visit. On the Israeli side, he's likely to be very well received. We have to remember that this issue of Jerusalem being recognized as the Israeli capital has been a pet issue for Netanyahu and for his government. On the Palestinian side, he was supposed to have a meeting, a bilateral meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and that has been canceled. The Palestinians immediately, when this news broke, said, we are not going to meet with Pence and we reject this move outright. So not a lot of progress being made in bilateral negotiations there, shall we say.
Well, Maya Shrader, thank you very much for your analysis.